what social workers did. I just assumed that they were there to take people's kids. But it was after taking my social work one-on-one class and ultimately getting my master's that I understood the world of social work as a profession and all the different roles that we can do. So let's come learn about a few of the roles that I did as a social worker and currently do today. Hi, my name is Dr. Gary Trey Taylor, licensed clinical social worker, your social work cousin, curator of the G.Taylor Show, and I'm here to discuss my social work roles and different social work roles that you can do as a social worker. One of the things that people ask a lot of times is what do social workers do? What did they look like? How they do their services? What did they do? And a lot of times, the thought patterns of what a social worker does and on a daily basis is depicted off of what we see in movies, sitcoms, shows, or we may have some type of personal experience with that social worker in our lives at some point in our lives. But I'm here to tell y'all, social workers do a variety of different roles, jobs across the spectrum. We are one of the, I would say, one of the more, how do I want to say this? We provide a majority of the mental health services in the states. We do a lot of mental health services and not just therapy. It can be community mental health, therapeutic day treatment, case management, you name it, along with individual and group therapy. And so those are different. That's just kind of the wide approach to what we do. We also teach. We also provide supervision. We work in the federal government. We work in the private sector. We work at Amazon. We work at Google. We work at YouTube. We work at NBA and NFL. Some of us work with clothing brands, things of that nature. We work in different businesses, organizations, all these different things, nonprofits, substance use, forensic social work, case management, state hospital, local hospital, healthcare hospital, medical hospital, mental health hospital, you name it, we work in different spaces and we have so many different roles. But today I want to talk about two of my main roles, or three of my, I'll say my past roles and my current role and what I do today. So I am a licensed clinical social worker by trade. I have my license. I've been licensed for the past 4 to 5 years at this point, I believe. And I also am a clinical supervisor. And what does a clinical supervisor mean? That means that I supervise social workers who are looking to become licensed as well in the state of Virginia. That we call them supervisees in social work. And so I meet with them for the last 2 to 3 years until they pass their exam once a week, at least until we meet 100 hours and they get their 3,000 clinical face-to-face hours. So if you're looking to become licensed, typically you have to get your MSW, you graduate, and then you start supervision or you become, supervising in social work, and you have to get 100 hours of supervision and 3,000 clinical hours, which can be face to face. Most of it has to be face to face. I think it's like 1,700, 1,800 ish face to face direct practice, clinical based work. And then the rest can be assessment, diagnosis, treatment planning, auxiliary services that can add on to that actual thing. But I tell people all the time, if you're working 40 hours a week, you pretty much get those actual social work hours within the 2 year time frame. The problem will be making sure that you get your 100 hours of supervision on a weekly basis to manage that. And finding a supervisor, because there is some difficulty in finding supervisors at the moment. You have to get those supervised hours once a week to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, making sure that you're, doing those clinical services and fit to actually do social work in this actual profession. Now, um, that's just the clinical supervision piece. Now, MSW, the Master's in Social Work degree, is our terminal degree. So you don't need another degree to technically practice social work. This also depends on state to state guidelines and how your state views you as a social worker. Some states allow you to practice social work with the MSW. Some want you to have the general licensure to be a social worker, whether that's LMSW, LBSW, uh, things like that. Those different distinctions. The LCSW looks different for different states because some of us can practice with the LCSW independently and don't have to get nothing else. And then also others have to have the LCSW or LGSW and then a LICSW as well. So that's something that you need to, read up on, learn about a little bit more at your state level, or if you're getting a degree in a certain state and you're going to move to another state, you need to be mindful of what their state licensure requirements are. Can you transfer hours? Sometimes states don't take hours from different states. What else do you have to do? Be mindful of that before you make that decision, especially if you know you're probably not going to stay in that state once you get your MSW, if you're getting it, wherever you're getting it at. Um, Now, I graduated George Mason University. I had my degree in my MSW, and my first job out of my social work degree program was working in crisis therapy as an emergency services therapist, where I did assessments to determine if individuals met criteria for psychiatric hospitalization. Our goal is not to put individuals in psychiatric hospitals. We're trying to find least restrictive alternatives for that, whether that's outpatient care, crisis stabilization, or just getting them a new appointment, or other items. So our goal is not put people in psychiatric hospitals, and so that was my first job out of graduate school, and that was a new experience for me. Even though I had worked psychiatric inpatient post undergrad for 2.5 years, doing the flip side of that, doing crisis therapy was a different approach. I didn't carry a caseload, so we would see people, assess people, and then you would either send them home or send them to a higher level of care. And so, higher level of care could be, outpatient treatment, outpatient therapy treatment. That could be groups. That could be crisis stabilization, and it's just like a step down from psychiatric inpatient. That could be partial hospitalization or intensive outpatient partial as well. And then there's psychiatric hospitalization. Obviously, those are the steps that you would go to. We typically use a lot with, outpatient therapy, crisis stabilization, and then psychiatric inpatient. Um, where that job was where I learned a lot about policies and how they impact psychiatric treatment in the state of Virginia, whether that's involuntary commitments, voluntary commitments, working with law enforcement officials, which was a little bit challenging at times, working with actual special justices, um, case managers of different psychiatric hospitals, and also, lawyers in that sense to who represented individuals who might be under involuntary commitments. And so learning that on the fly, understanding how policy was also affecting mental health treatment in the state of Virginia, how they go hand in hand, how much had to, be checked off on before you could do a certain thing, was definitely insightful, and it gave me a good insight to understanding and seeing the DSM-5 up close and personal. Every diagnosis that you talk about in your DSM-5 class or your neuroscience class, and then you see it up close and personal, and you see how different sometimes it can be in person versus the text. Then you also see the policies that govern how folks are treated in psychiatric hospitals, things that come up that could be ethical dilemmas for us, and how you go about managing that actual space. So that was a good. I will say I think that everybody should at least intern or at least work in crisis therapy at some point in their career, because it gives them the opportunity to kind of work backwards, but kind of see crisis therapy from a different approach, because typically we don't teach crisis therapy at the MSW level at the way that emergency services therapists work. So I think it's a good opportunity to kind of get your clinical skill set up to date, also, but also experience how diagnoses show up, contextual factors play a role, and then also how policies in your state or locality impact mental health treatment as well. Then you also get to learn about hospital policies as well in reference to folks' acuity, which means like their level of symptoms, if they're able to take that on or not. And then you're going to see the gaps in the mental health system and how that impacts folks getting the help that they need, from the highest level of care, psychiatric care, state hospitalization all the way down to outpatient care. So that was my first job doing crisis assessment. I think it's a good, it's a very intense job. And I know I have colleagues who work there for years upon years, but it can be challenging if you don't practice good, sound self care and got some good work life balance. The second job that I did was a care coordinator at a substance use clinic, and I was in charge of making sure that individuals who came into our clinic had access to resources, whether that was housing, higher level of care for substance use treatment, and then also, food insecurities, helping with insurance, and understanding, what that looks like. In the midst of that, also, I was leading treatment team meetings for the actual healthcare professionals that were there. And so I was leading a team of psychiatric nurse practitioners, nurses, other social workers, LCSWs, and we would do treatment team meetings on the clients that were there, and understanding what their actual progress within the programs, addressing any type of problematic things that may have came up, addressing if this individual needs a higher level of care, and giving them the referral to that higher level of care if they needed that. So I was part of that as well. And just, learning about, and that was a shift in learning from, okay, this is substance use primary, mental health secondary versus mental health primary, substance use secondary. And it was a good change of pace, but it also still, was very insightful, informative on, again, how the systems work in reference to substance use treatment, how policies govern substance use treatment, and what the insurance how the insurance plays a role in what treatment is available and not available to our clients and consumers, and also how that is ever evolving every year or every 9 to 10 months. After you see with the last few Medicaid cuts, how that's impacted folks' access to care in that situation. And so, that was one of those things where individuals, they had issues with Medicaid. We had to help them get re-enrolled, help them find the information on that. That was one of those part of that piece for being a care coordinator. And so I think that role helped me understand the substance use side of it, of the systems, and again, policies. What's your local policy? What's your state policy say about substance use? What is your hospital's policy around substance use, and what is the insurance policy on substance use, right? We had sometimes we the insurance companies had care coordinators that were working to get folks in treatment, with us, or following up with us to make sure that the person was in treatment and getting what they need. So there was kind of a wraparound services for that. But I was really exposed to individuals experiencing homelessness, and really taken back about how bad their numbers are, in the area when working with this actual job. And this was really surprised. Like, knew it was a situation of individuals experiencing homelessness, but did not know how bad that number was, and how um, the system of the system set up to work with individuals experience homeless, how constrained that system was as well. And so, and then learning about the different definitions around street homelessness, individuals experience homelessness. Do they not have housing, or do they have a place to stay, or they jump in couch to couch? That makes a difference in everything. So, so yeah, so that was one of the, another job that I've done as a social worker, as a social worker by trade, but labeled a care coordinator. um and they have that for different insurances companies as well too. And then also, social worker by trade, MSW, but emergency services therapist. Lastly, before I got into teaching, I was running my own private practice. So now I became LCSW and business owner, right? And chief therapist of my organization, my business. And now doing not psychiatric, but doing individual therapy, outpatient therapy to individuals in the state of Virginia, virtually and in person. And that was a shift because, again, you got to remember, I started in doing crisis therapy, not really carrying a caseload, and then going into substance use counseling or care coordination, and then going into individual private practice. I was doing group therapy at some point, sitting in on that as well before I got into substance use. I was doing a lot of community based groups, psychoeducation groups as well. But then the last piece was doing outpatient therapy, seeing about 15 to 8, between 12 to 18 clients a week. Did that for about 3.5 years before I became a assistant professor and a clinical supervisor. Now, prior to now, at this point in time, where it stands at, I still do clinical supervision and I also teach full time. I do a lot of psychoeducation workshops as a social worker. I have done some consulting as well with some agencies and organizations, just trying to give back, some of the information that I've learned working in the space and helping organizations or helping, other private practice owners or social workers on how to navigate that with their client, navigate certain issues with their clients, uh, things like that, cultural competency, different interventions, partnerships, organizations, you name it, thinking about those different avenues on how that can help their their therapeutic interventions with the clients that they serve. So you could take that expertise that you learn in those different spaces, and then you can also do consulting, do trainings, workshops for new social workers, current social workers, or folks who are working with a specialized population that would love to have your actual insight versus sometimes the text is hard to conceptualize and put into practice at its face value. But if you talk to somebody who's utilized it, worked with it, and kind of made it its own in a real world setting, they can actually explain it to you a lot better. So I get that a lot when working with my students and making sure that we have this text, we have this language here, but breaking in that down to a real life scenario helps them with understanding the application process of it as well. Putting theory to practice is what we say in that space. And so, yeah, so those are three social work roles that I have held in my social work career in the last 11 years, which is emergency services therapist, care coordinator, outpatient therapist in private practice, and clinical social work supervisor. Now, be mindful that only one of those designations or one of those actual job roles or duties actually has the name social work in it. So not only when we start talking about macro or meso jobs that you have to look out for that doesn't have social work in it, you might see some micro or some direct practice jobs that do not have the name social work in it. So you have to, and if you actually look at the job posting, you'll see the name, you see the job duties, which will kind of, align with social work practices. But then if you go down to education requirements or experience, required, it'll kind of tell you like, counseling, social work preferred, master's level preferred in social work or human services. Anything that say human services or counseling, and, as a social worker, you can kind of get away with that as well. Some will ask specifically for social workers. Sometimes they won't, but it does not mean that they will not take a social worker. So that's what social workers, that's just a small percentage of what social workers do. I have so many different social work friends and colleagues that do amazing work in different roles, different titles, and different ways of their actual social work profession. But and feel free to ask. I try to bring some more folks on or go through my actual list and see how many interviews I've done with different social workers on my platform to see what the roles that they do. They a lot of them, some of them in private practice, some of them teach, some of them do forensics, some of them do still do, crisis work. Some of them work case management. There's a lot of social workers that do different things. But again, when you're searching for jobs or you're asking what do, we do a lot of different things, but the titles may be different than it might not say social work. So hope that was helpful for you. Hope that you kind of learned a little bit about what social workers do, what the profession, what the titles are, what you can and can't do in the profession of social work. At some point, we'll break down between what's the difference between understanding how you practice with the MSW versus the LCSW. All depends on state to state, area, area, locality, locality, but we'll get there shortly later on sometime. I just wanted to hop on and get a video in because it's been a while. So make sure you like, share, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the G. Taylor Show This is again Dr. Gary Trey Taylor, licensed clinical social worker, your social work cousin, and I hope that you have an amazing week. And I will talk with